Welcome, everybody, to an episode of Event Marketing Redefined. I am your host, Matt Kleinrock, CEO of Rockway Exhibits and Events. And today, I'm here with Nancy Touhill. She is the Global Head of Event Marketing for LexisNexis, on the risk side. Nancy, thanks for showing up. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Awesome. I should have said Risk Solutions, right? You're on the Risk Solutions side, correct?
It is. Yep. It's LexisNexis Risk Solutions. That's it.
I was so worried about screwing up the LexisNexis thing that I went right. But anyway, they get it.
Yeah.
So Nancy, you're the global head of event marketing, right?
Yep.
And you have a cool background, which you and I talked about previously, which is you've worked for an agency, you've worked for an association, and now you work for a brand on the event side. So I'd love just a little bit of insight on your side, like your career path. How has it been helpful? Just anything interesting on those three phases.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I started my career with a sports and events agency in Virginia. Actually got my master's at VCU, Virginia Commonwealth University. And the end of that program was an internship that then translated into a full-time position with the agency. And I spent time doing kind of brand sponsorship fulfillment at large scale events like the US Open, US Fashion Week. We had an LPGA tournament that we did. I also did a little bit of business development with them, but it was mainly the sponsorship fulfillment at these really large scale events, which was really cool, especially, as a 24-year-old. It was a really exciting part of my career. I did a brief stint at a nonprofit. I did some event fundraising at a nonprofit in the DC area. And then the longest part of my career thus far has been with a trade association. I was with a trade association in the wireless industry for 13 years. I started in event and membership sales, and we outsourced the sales and planning of our largest annual conference. And eventually I kind of convinced the powers that be that we could bring that in-house under the association umbrella. So we built a team, we built a part of the organization and took that on in-house. So like I said, I was with them for 13 years. And then I moved over to the corporate world in September of 2021. And it's been a really big change, but a hugely positive change. I have loved it. And I manage a team who oversees the implementation of trade shows, customer events, internal events like sales conferences, executive meetings, and kind of a million other little things in between. We often get pulled into events or ask questions about events. We really do a little bit of everything, and I love it.
That's cool. I like the sort of, when you hear people's backgrounds, it's so funny as I have conversations with people, when you hear the backgrounds, it's interesting how they fold into doing the job, the global head of event, right? I mean, it's an interesting, I've had a few people that I've talked to, somebody was more on the product side, but a company that really deals with products, and kind of she came up that way. I had others that started in like hospitality and very, very interesting paths of getting there. So what is your biggest struggle as the global head of event marketing?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest struggle for most event marketers is just finding enough hours in the day to get everything done. But that's not really it. I've got a small but mighty team, and I work really hard to make sure that they have enough balance in their lives, that I have enough balance in my life. And we also struggle with managing costs and budgets, as things just have seemingly skyrocketed lately.
Absolutely, they have. This one, I was just at Exhibitor Live, and we ran our podcast there, talking to all types of event marketers, event managers, and just industry conversation. And much of that some of it was revolved around cost, right? A lot of people wondering, where does it level off? People thinking about how to allocate their budgets differently. Is there anything you're doing right now differently with budget? Are you looking into things closer? Are you cutting things out? What are you doing with that?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit of both. We are looking at things closer, and we're honestly trying to do the best that we can to predict some of these costs, especially with trade shows. I mean, I think the material handling costs are really, really high right now. AV costs are really high. There was a show last year where I spent $16,000 on internet so that we could stream football on a Sunday afternoon at our booth. And it's communicating those out to my internal stakeholders as well. I think sometimes they think, okay, my budget for a booth is $50,000. But it's not really $50,000. It's $50,000 plus trucking, plus material handling, plus. Mm-hmm. And those add up really fast. And it's just making sure that everybody really understands the full scope of what things are going to cost.
Yeah. I mean, that's one, the AV, the material handling, those pieces there, as well as everything else has gone up, right? With inflation and things like that. So it's wanting predictable costs, I think, is something that is really apparent in the trade show world that's been around for quite some time, right? People asking, trying to find a way. And with multiple parties in charge of those costs and delegating them, I think there becomes some confusion. But for the exhibitors, it's an absolute must for them. It's actually a report came out from the exhibitor advocate. I don't know if you know who Jessica Sabila is, but they're exhibitor advocate. They're really good. If you need something as an exhibitor, you can go to them. They have a lot of information. They just put out like a big budget report. It's pretty interesting.
I'll have to check that out. Yeah.
Go to her LinkedIn. Her name is Jessica Sabila, and I'll give it to you after this, but you should check it out for sure.
Yeah.
What's kind of like one of your biggest accomplishments in event marketing, in anything that stands out?
Yeah. So my organization is highly matrixed, and my team works very closely with our marketing stakeholders. So our marketers who support the rest of the organization. And thus far, I would say that my biggest accomplishment is really encouraging the marketing partners to think outside of the box and think outside of what has always been done. It's been exciting to see teams participate in new events and leave old ones behind and see what kind of goals they're accomplishing there. I joined the company in September of 21. So COVID was still either canceling events or postponing events. And it gave us a unique opportunity to really evaluate where we were participating and what we were doing. And we've carried that through to 22 and 23. And it's nice to be able to really justify why we're participating in events instead of just signing up for the same old thing every year.
There's a few things I want to pull on there. That one is, let's go to the quicker one. The first one is you saying about the events, right? Like, I think that ties back to budget, which is people are not just going to events just to sponsor an exhibit anymore, just because they always did.
That's right.
You know what I mean? They're having to find better avenues, more justification for their program, and go places and exhibit or sponsor or activate where it makes sense, right? Where they're producing results. That's kind of what I heard you just say.
Yeah, that's right. And, show managers have a challenge there too, because they can't just put on the same old show and expect people to come back to it. So they're really challenged as well to provide a unique experience and to give people the tools to justify the spend now.
I just had a conversation. It's actually, the podcast came out maybe 2 episodes ago. I don't know. We're doing so many of them, but Nicole Bush, she's the press officer for AHR, Big HVAC Expo. And it was very interesting to hear from her. Part of her job is trying to make the experience for exhibitors, sponsors, and attendees better, and hearing how they're trying to progress that show. I mean, that show's been around since the 1930s. So longevity, but now they're trying to progress it, which is kind of what you were saying there, which is they have to. These shows have to change.
Yeah, they do. They have to change.
And then the first thing you said back that I really like is, okay, so you're talking about your tie with the marketing department at your company, right? So I'm always fascinated by this, because I think when you're in events, a big problem in the industry that I see is that marketing and events kind of get separated sometimes, but really events are marketing in my eyes. So I see this struggle between the event side kind of waving their hand, being like, hey, we're marketers. We're just not doing conventional marketing. So tell me more about like your relationship with marketing, because it all comes down to like story, narrative, not branding, but truly like how you convey your messaging to your audience. You're just doing it in person. So tell me about that relationship, kind of what you need from them and how it all works.
Yeah. That's a great topic to kind of unpack a little bit. So within my company, we are part of the marketing team. We all roll up to the SVP of marketing. And, events is part of that, and which I appreciate, because to your point, I mean, events are experiential marketing. That is what they are. It's feeling, interacting, touching your brand, and interacting in person. So we do work very closely together. We have to. We call them segment marketers or vertical marketers on our team. We have a great relationship and a great kind of back and forth with them. They trust our feedback, we trust their feedback, and we really come together and put on these events, whether they're trade shows or customer meetings. So we all work very closely together, which is refreshing.
How are you deciding? Let's say you're going to a trade show, right? How are you working with them to come up with the message, the story, the narrative, the experience, the engagement, right? Because you're obviously going there for reasons. I'm assuming you have goals, you have some KPIs, you have, you're going there to go find some form of success in terms of business initiatives, right? So how do you work with them specifically on that? Or do you guys have that figured out and you basically have the carte blanche at this point to just kind of go?
Well, I mean, we figure it out on a case-by-case basis, because to your point, the goals are different. There's one show that we invest really heavily in, where the goal is to have branding and perhaps some thought leadership. We don't really get a lot of leads out of this particular event. And so the strategy is much different there. We make sure that the way that the booth is positioned is that there's places for one-on-one meetings or small group meetings, more so than a huge brand, for example. There are meetings where leads are the only goal. So we go there and we scoop up as many leads as humanly possible. And so we make sure that we are drawing people to the booth, because because the whole goal is to get people to the booth, to get their information so that we can follow up with them. So it really varies. It's case by case basis. Some shows, the goal is thought leadership, to work really hard to get an earned speaking placement at the event. So unfortunately, there's no real magic formula for that. You have to kind of evaluate those on a case by case basis.
Of course. I mean, each show in themselves is so important to understand why you go, who you go for, what you're trying to accomplish, and putting a plan together. You know what I mean? That sounds like what you guys are doing there. You said the one show, you said it was kind of a bigger show. But literally you're there so that you have branding there, and then for thought leadership, right?
Branding, thought leadership, and we do a lot of one-on-one meetings, but they're not necessarily sales meetings. They're not necessarily generating leads. We'll kind of evaluate partnership opportunities. We've gotten some acquisitions out of this particular show. Gotcha. So we've sat down and, talked to companies that we might want to acquire. So it's an interesting concept. And we send about 20, 25 people to this one.
I think that's I'm glad I asked that, because that's such a good point, right? Because when you talk to people, they're like, oh, we're at the show for leads. Oh, we're at the show. And that is not always the case.
Right. Not always the case.
Yeah. And that's what comes back to, like, when you're, so if you're like a young event marketer, or you're an event marketer, like, you have to be so dialed into why you are there and going, and what's the purpose, and what's the kind of like, what is it giving back to you? So that's a good example of not a show with leads, not what you would say a direct one-on-one return on investment per se, but it's a different spend.
Correct.
Tell me a little bit, is there anything when it comes to trade shows in particular that keeps you up at night?
Sure. I mean, a lot of little things keep me up at night, but I'm also a little bit high strung, as many event marketers are. Yeah. But there's some big things that keep me up at night, certainly. One of the bigger things is making sure that my team is fulfilled and reaching their potential, and that we're working really closely together to provide our stakeholders with the best possible experience. Because like we talked about, that's what it is. People come for the experience, and we need to dig deep and make sure that the experience is as great as it can be. I recently very enthusiastically, and perhaps wasn't the most popular thing that I've ever said to a colleague, that all events are important. And I do mean that. All of the events that we put on are important. Our small trade shows are very important to the people who are participating in them. Our large customer event is important to the people that are participating in that. We certainly can't give the same level of service to each event. The smaller events just don't get the same level of service that the larger ones do, but they're still very important to the people who are participating in them. So we have to give them that sense of importance.
I think what you said about all events are important. Like, I think it comes back to like the sort of like what events truly are at their core, like that interpersonal connection, that face-to-face way of communicating. And when you're with people one-on-one, it's different. And it is important to show up well, to have good conversations. You know what I mean? That is the point of events, right? Is to be in person. So I would agree with you that all events are important, right? And that essentially you have to show up the right way to all of them and execute the right way when you're there.
Yeah.
What are some of the goals and initiatives for you, right? With your event marketing program, what are some of the goals and initiatives? What are you focused on?
Yeah, I mean, a huge focus of mine is just to make sure that we can justify what we're doing, that we can justify where we're focusing our marketing efforts and where we're spending that money. The bulk of our work supports the sales organization, and it allows them to spend time in person with clients and with prospects. So we work closely with the larger marketing department just to make sure that the goals of the event align with the goals of the sales team. There's nothing worse than having people show up at an event and realizing that we kind of are not on the same page. So it's very important to work closely on that. And I said this earlier, just making sure that we know why we're doing something. There's a huge danger in the phrase, well, that's how we've always done it. So I try very hard to keep those words out of people's mouths and just make sure that everybody can clearly articulate what we're doing and why we're doing it.
How about the phrase, we always go to the show?
Right.
We've heard, that is one we ask. I mean, when we work with like new prospects and people, we're always like, they want to talk about the booth, the first interaction. We're always like, whoa.
Yeah.
Why are you going to this trade show? And the answers are, people are like confused that we're asking the question. And sometimes people are like, well, we always do. And we're like, nah, that's not really what we're looking for. We have to like ease them. But sometimes, to what you just said, people go because they've always gone, or they don't know any different, or it's just what they do.
Yeah.
So shaking that kind of like tree a little bit and saying why is really, really big, because I think it opens up people's eyes.
Totally. And another one, this is just kind of more of a personal goal, is that I'm working to be a smidge more flexible and letting things go.
Aren't we all?
Yeah. And just letting things go that are out of my control.
Yeah.
I was in the UK for a trade show about 10 days ago. And the first day of the show, our booth was packed and a piece of our logo fell off the top of the booth and landed on the ground. Thankfully, it didn't hit anybody. And there was just nothing that could be done during that time. And it kind of ate me up a little bit during the day, because every picture that I have, has that missing piece of a logo. But there's nothing that could be done. The show went great. We all had to roll with it and come up with a plan after the show closed that day to get it back up. So flexibility is important, and just kind of realizing what you can control and what you cannot control and how you react in those situations.
It's like life advice.
It applies though. It certainly applies.
Yeah. Applies everywhere. What's some of the most important like lessons, takeaways, things that you took from your previous roles, right? Like we talked about with the agency role, with the sponsorships, and then with association work. What have you taken with you to kind of have the success you've had in events?
Yeah, that's a great question. The agency world is so crazy, and the pace, it is really a breakneck pace. I joke that it was a competition to see who could get there first in the morning and who could stay latest in the evening. And managing those billable hours was really important. And you kind of run on a lean staff in the agency world. And so I am used to a very fast pace because of that. That was the beginning of my career. And I'm used to that. I do well with a fast pace. I do well with a deadline. And since then I have done everything with a pretty lean team. And so that was a really important lesson for me to learn early in my career, that sometimes this is the pace, oftentimes this is the pace. And oftentimes these are the resources that you have, and do the best you can with them. With the agency world, the pace wasn't as breakneck, if you will, but the focus at the agency really was on net profit. It was selling as much as we possibly could and spending as little as we possibly could, while making sure that the attendee experience was still really positive. So I am a really good. I love a budget. I'm a good budget manager.
Yeah.
And I think that that's because that really was the focus. Net profit was the focus at the agency.
It's really nice separation with what you were doing, right? To be able to roll in to kind of running events. What's kind of like career goals for you? You have a dream job? You have any, are you in your dream job? Do you have a dream job? What kind of career goals do you have?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love the job that I have right now. I'm really very happy. I'm very fulfilled. And I think I'm pretty close. If I'm not there, I'm pretty close to the dream job. I work really, really hard. It's been a long time since I've had this heavy of a workload, but I'm so supported at my organization, and that really makes a huge difference to have that fantastic support. I feel very fulfilled. And so I'd like to just keep growing where I am. I think that's the dream, at least right now. The dream is to keep growing where I am. We've got a ton of potential. There's a lot that we can do. And, I really want to keep building on what we've got right now because it's pretty great.
Nice. That's cool to hear. Anything you see with the direction of events and the trade show industry? Like I heard you touch on it earlier. You had kind of mentioned the fact that like these shows and these associations have to evolve and change. I agree. I could talk about it for hours. I think the value that the trade show provides has changed.
Yep.
And that they used to be the only show in town. And it was that you had to go to your annual conference because you had to be there or people thought you're out of business. And it's the only way to see potential partners and connections. And now it's just not the case. Sales and marketing teams have access to tools like Zoom Info and Seamless AI. They can contact and find anybody they want. So I think that you mentioned it being more experiential, more of experience. It needs to kind of move that direction. But outside of that, I mean, any trends you see, anything in particular?
Yeah, I mean, I'll challenge a little bit about that because yes, you can find anybody on Zoom Info. You can find them on LinkedIn. You can set up meetings. You can talk to them all day. But there's something that's so efficient about a trade show. There's something so efficient about an event is that everybody is there and you'll work from dawn until dusk for those 3 days, those 2.5 days, whatever it is. But you will get so much done in that time. So I think the efficiency of an event is irreplaceable. That you can get so much done in a short period of time. But I completely agree with you that it did used to be you had to be at your industry's trade show. And if you weren't there, then you were toast. But so many other organizations started peeling off and doing other events. And so the competition got much stronger. When I was at the association, we would partially joke and partially be incredibly frustrated that everybody thinks that they can put on an event. Everybody thinks that they can put on a trade show. And it really did detract from some of what we were trying to accomplish with our show. And of course, you have to roll with that because there's nothing that you can do other than to provide attendees with the best experience possible. So I think it's really important that shows continue to do that they continue to evolve and provide their attendees with a really fantastic experience. And that's going to vary depending on the industry and depending on the show.
Yeah, I think with that, like part of my thought is that like shows should be doubling down on the in-person, right? Because they are in person. There is so much that can be done virtually. The world has shifted, right? But like the in-person is such a good experience. Like you're saying, those 3 days, those 4 days together, it's a whirlwind. So much happens. And I think that these shows should be double and triple down on the experience that the sponsor exhibitor and the attendees have. How do they help them do what they want to do there? Furthermore, build relationships, have meaningful conversations, make connections, right? Sell partnerships. They need to foster that more and more and more. And I think that will drive a lot of value to these trade shows and annual conferences that people will then want to sponsor, want to attend, and feel kind of like they need to be in the room. You know what I mean? You get a little bit of FOMO.
Sure. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more.
What kind of additional actions, strategies are you implementing, working on in your program? Anything cool, anything different, anything, even if it's standard, just something you've had success with?
Yeah, I don't know that this is terribly revolutionary strategy, but the amount of effort that has to be put forth to be successful at an event is significant. You can't phone it in. I'd rather not be at an event than have a half-baked presence there. And I'm fortunate that our team is really creative and innovative and really, really hustles at events, and it pays off. My biggest frustration at the trade association was when I would have exhibitors say to me, well, there was just no traffic at my booth. And we don't have that issue as exhibitors because our team hustles. They set appointments. We have compelling content at our booth. We have giveaways. Our booths are crowded because we work hard to make them crowded. We don't just pop up a sign and hope for the best. The amount of effort that goes into a show is really important, and it should be a significant amount of effort in order to get a return on that investment.
I love that answer, right? Because it's like so simple, but so important, and so many people miss it.
Yeah.
The idea that it takes significant effort level to do an event is so true, right? It just is. So what does a little bit of your pre-trade show campaign effort initiative, what does that look like? Like what kind of advice would you give to a young event marketer running a program for a brand, going to a trade show? Like what kind of advice would you give them to get ready to go kind of generate that traffic and have a good show?
Yeah. There's so much. And we have a tiered approach with our events currently. We have tier 1 events, tier 2, and tier 3. Tier 1 events are big events that usually have a full marketing campaign surrounding them. So the lead up to those is much different than the lead up to a tier 2 or a tier 3 event. A tier 1 event, I'll give you an example. We participated in a trade show in April in Florida, and this event, the planning for it started in November, really, and we had a full marketing campaign in the lead up to that event. And our sales team who were there, they had, like I said earlier, dawn until dusk appointments and meetings. So it takes effort from everybody. And it takes the marketing team and the events team to kind of drive that effort, to dictate what that looks like. So there's a lot of planning calls. There's a lot of communication. I mean, we over communicate what's going to happen, what the booth looks like, where you can have meetings, what you should be doing. We over communicate that because I think everybody needs to have that information in order to feel comfortable, to feel empowered, to take their little piece of that event and do what they need to do to make it great. Every person that attends, that participates, has a really key role, and it's up to us to make sure that they have the information that they need to fulfill that role.
You just touched a little bit on like sales in that process, right? So what kind of relationship do you have with sales? Because obviously I'm a big believer that like marketing is kind of teeing things up for sales all the time. So the partnership has to be good, especially on the event side. I think in general, marketing and sales have a lot of disconnects, right? But the closer a marketing and sales department is, the better things typically go. On the event side, how do you work with sales to make sure that they are involved, they understand what's going on, and that they are set up for success?
Yeah. And so I don't have as much direct contact with the sales team as our marketer does. I work really closely with the marketer who works really closely with sales.
Okay.
However, when we get down to the kind of final days before a show, we're all together. We're all in it together, and everybody's communicating and everybody's making sure that they're on the same page. But the marketer on a particular event is the one that really has that strong relationship with sales and really nurtures and drives it. On the other hand, for our customer events that we have, we host a big customer event every September, and I do work very closely with sales on that. I work with them to kind of cultivate their invitation list to make sure that they have the knowledge about the event that they need. So it kind of depends on the type of event that we're working on.
Makes sense. And I'm assuming that for the trade show stuff, that your marketer that you're working with is setting up sales, understanding language and the narrative and why you guys are there and all the things that you're preparing for and building out your trade show booth and sponsorships and everything that you're doing, that everybody, all three departments per se, are on the same page.
Correct. Yep. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And providing them with information. And we have an event brief that it can be 20 pages long, just with the information that the sales team would need for the event.
What about data? Are you guys collecting any data? Are you ROI, ROX, ROE? I'm hearing a lot of RO different things in all my conversations. Curious kind of what you track, what matters to you all.
Yeah. So you asked the right person that question. I work in the data and analytics industry. So data really is our love language. We put numbers behind almost everything that we do.
Nice.
When I started with the company in 2021, it was in September of 21. So we dove almost immediately into 2022 planning. So I spent the better part of 22 observing and learning and really just taking in what we as an organization were doing. But when we began working on 2023 planning, I reached out to our incredible market insights team. We have an entire team within the marketing department dedicated to kind of insights and data and analytics. And I asked them to work with me to develop a tool that we can use to track our results with each event that we're doing in 2023. Nice. So they created a custom survey that we call the event scorecard, and it asks the exact same questions about each event that we participate in. And every event has a scorecard, whether it's a large event, a tier 1 event, or a tier 3 event. So the marketer has to answer the questions on the event scorecard. And it is amazing. We're getting incredible information about leads, our thought leadership, our speaking opportunities, our branding, our overall spend. And it's all in this nice little neat sheet. It's 1 page per event, and we'll use it to start evaluating our participation in 24. You can see it's black and white. Was this great? Was this not great? And it's such an exciting tool to have at our fingertips. Our senior leadership is very interested in it, and it's really exciting to have. And I feel very lucky to have the opportunity to work with a team who took the vision. I mean, I had a kind of rambling phone call with them, and they took the vision and just totally ran with it. I'm really excited about it. I can't wait to see everything kind of laid out at the end of the year.
Nice. That's very cool. So it's a survey that basically the marketer in charge of that event or who's there has to fill out at the end.
Correct.
And then that turns into a scorecard that comes back as the results of the event.
Yep. Correct.
What's some of the stuff that gets asked? What's being computed there?
Yeah. So, I mean, we ask what was the goal of the event, and we give them choices. It's, leads, thought leadership, branding, customer meetings. So number 1, what was the goal? And did you meet the goal? What was the spend? Were you within budget? Were you out of budget? And overall, did you accomplish what you wanted to accomplish at the event? So everybody gets asked the same questions, and there's some kind of pre-baked answers in there. And then there's opportunity for them to kind of free-form answers as well.
That's cool. I think it's interesting because the person that is there has a really good beat on what happened, right? Yep. It's not always just like, oh, we loaded up 100 leads into the lead retrieval and that's in our CRM, because I've had this conversation so many times. So it's interesting to hear that you guys are doing this. And I love it because so many event marketers are trying to track ROI but really what they're trying to track is impact. Yep. Right? They're trying to track the impact that their program is having to prove its worth and go back and say, look, this is what we're doing. This is the initiatives it's pushing and driving. And I love that you guys are doing a survey for the person there because they have a beat on what those conversations were like. Did you talk to 3 people that are already in your pipeline, right, but you know that they've now progressed in your pipeline because of this conversation? Or did you say, hey, we collected 500 leads, telling you 100 of these are excellent leads that we have poured into the top of our pipeline? There's just more detail there. And it goes to what you said about the goals and the why. It's really cool.
Yeah. And it's kind of forced us to evaluate what a lead is too, because the way that our CRM works is that at some point, a lead is only a new lead. But you just said it so perfectly. It could be somebody that's already a lead, that's already in the pipeline, but now they're going to spend another $1 million with us. Yeah. And we need to be able to attribute that to this show or to this initiative. And so we've had to work, we've got a team kind of working on that too. Like, how do you define a lead? What counts and what doesn't count? Because it's important. And there's some nuance in there that could easily be missed if you didn't think through those types of things.
I always thought it would be interesting, and I'm not good with like developing stuff like this, but I always thought it'd be interesting to say, inside of a CRM, could you have some form of touch point that allows a marketer or a salesperson or whoever has access to go in and maybe having labels to the touch points that have happened to a prospect? Because attribution is an unperfect thing all the time in marketing. It is not something, even people, when they come in from like a Google ad, right? Just something dumb like that. Sometimes people are like, oh, this is from the Google ad. I'm like, no, it's not.
Yeah.
Because they could have heard about you or saw an ad on Facebook or went to a conference. And then when they Google searched you, the ad is the first thing that comes up.
Right.
And then they go through. So attribution is not a perfect thing. So I love that you guys are trying to really get the scope and the general vibe and feel of what happened at an event. Cause there's so much like gold in that right there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been really,
Nice.
It's been a really cool initiative.
Very cool. All right, let's wrap up here a little bit. Tell me, I love this question. I get some of the best answers on this is like, what's advice to your younger self, right? Advice to a younger event marketer, or somebody aspiring to be the global head of event marketing.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've got probably several answers for that. So I'll just go through a few. I think a really big one is to just take the time to listen and learn and to understand the reason why something is done or why something has been done. I don't think that you can really make a recommendation or really have influence unless you understand the why behind it and sometimes the history behind it. I think that that's really key. But I always say to have a recommendation ready as well. I see people all the time just kind of throwing things over the fence. What do you like? What giveaways do you like? What do you think we should do? And I always tell people, send the options over, but also tell us what your recommendation is. Don't just toss things over the fence because it makes you look like you're not really contributing. Anybody can look up giveaway ideas, but if you take the time if you take that extra step and provide a recommendation, I think that that's really important. I think it's important to not take everything personally. I spent a lot of time in my early career, dwelling on things that people said or being upset about it. And oftentimes it's not personal. And it's very easy to take something too personally.
It's more life advice from you today.
Yeah, well, it's true though. It's true.
Yeah, it is. It is.
And I think another really important one is to take your vacation days. It's probably more life advice than career advice, but they overlap so much. We all work so hard and it's not a 9-to-5 job. It's far from a 9-to-5 job. So it's important to realize that everybody needs a break and the world's not going to burn down if you're not there for a little while, if you're taking a little time to yourself. So I think that that's really important too.
You said that you can't have influence unless you have the history or the why behind something. I really, really like that because that's almost in all facets of things, right? And it's like, sometimes it's one or the other. It's not always just the history, right? Because sometimes history could make you think one way or the other, but I like that you said the why as well. And it's a matter of a young person understanding what's happening and why it's happening and the way things are done and the manner in which they're done. I think that's really, really good advice. And I always press people when I'm talking to young event marketers and people start asking questions.
Yeah.
Start going to leadership. Ask why. Why are we at the show? What have we done? What are the results? What are the KPIs? What are the expectations? What are you wanting from this show? And I always say, like, it'll spin heads. It'll make leadership be like, who's this smart person, this smart kid working in this company, asking these really good questions.
Right. Right. And I think it gives you a lot of credibility too. If you understand what if you understand what's going on. I mean, there are people that have been at my company for 30 years. I want to understand what they've been through in those 30 years. And I want to be able to have a conversation with them, not just kind of charge in or on the other hand, kind of toss things over to them and let them make the decisions.
You said a couple really cool things today. That one, I just kind of recapped that quote. I was writing some of these down. You said another one. You said efficiency of the event or the conference is irreplaceable. I think that's a really good quote, because it's like, it is true. Those 2, 3, 4 days at a conference, like you need to go all after it. You need to have all your eggs in that basket and go get the most from it. You said it's a significant effort level to have success at events. That one I really like as well, because I think it does take effort, but it can be really fruitful for you if you do it the right way, coming out the other side. And then of course, the quote I just read about the influence and knowing the history of the why. So, well, Nancy, thanks for coming on my show. Thanks for talking to me. You gave personal advice and work life, which is really good, but it was a pleasure having you. Where can people find you?
Oh yeah. Well, I think LinkedIn is probably the best. You can see dog and kid pictures on Instagram, but LinkedIn is probably the best place to find me. So I'd love to connect with any of your listeners, and happy to do so at any time. And really appreciate you having me on. This was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Nancy, thanks for being here. Thanks for everybody who's listening. It's another episode of Event Marketing Redefined, and we'll catch you next time. Thank you so much.